the truth is that children, actually humans in general, it takes 400 repetitions to create a new synapse in the brain by rote.
What?
But it only takes 10 to 20 through play.
Wow.
So the difference is dramatic, and you've probably heard me say that in the past, but it's striking, and that statistic has always stuck with me. So I think...
You're listening to Granite Goodness, the podcast where we interview New Hampshire people making the world a better place.
Oh, Susie, where are you going now?
My name is Andy DeMeo. This episode was sponsored by and recorded in Treeline Outfitters in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Today, I'm speaking to Marissa Rafal. She is the founder of the New Hampshire Toy Library Network, where she helps libraries across New Hampshire lend out amazing toys at no cost to families. Our conversation covers rebuilding community in America, the Greek philosopher Plato, learning from children about the importance of free play, kids who run errands in Tokyo, and a ton of other stuff I hope you enjoy on this episode of Granite Goodness. Marissa, welcome to Granite Goodness.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you on here. I say that about everybody, but I really mean it. With you and with everybody.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so I feel like you do a lot of cool things, but the other night, you came to a wonderful networking event that I help organize called Sustainability Brews. You brought together a bunch of great people for a really great cause. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was such a joy to be a part of. I was really grateful to you and Ian. Does he say it Gaudreau? I've never heard it pronounced.
I say Gaudreau.
Gaudreau, okay. But it was such a beautiful event, and Treeline was so nice to host it. You've put together a great community. And I think just the collaboration was such a joy to be a part of, because at the New Hampshire Toy Library, like, we're so big into partnerships and elevating what other community members are doing, and uplifting experts in their field. So to be invited to this sustainability community that you've built was just such a treat, and all the professionals who were there were so kind and so welcoming, and we were so grateful for their support and all the toys that they gathered, and it was just a great evening.
I feel bad right off the bat making you talk about like something great that I've done, which is not what.
No, but you have. It's amazing.
Like, wow, look at me.
Built.
No, well, I mean, it reminds me. I find myself saying this about a lot of things, but Toy Library, New Hampshire Toy Library, is one of those things that to me feels like such a good idea that you're a little shocked when you realize it didn't already exist, right? Of like, how is this possible? This feels so smart and natural and intuitive and rational, right? What do you mean it wasn't already off the ground and happening, right? And that's a little bit how I feel about, you coming or being represented or having a place in our little sustainability community, because it's such a natural complement, to all the things that we're interested in. Maybe you could tell us the story from the beginning, and that can be as far back as you want it to be. What is the New Hampshire Toy Library? How did it start?
Yeah.
Who are you?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you. So I guess if you started from the beginning for me personally anyway, it was actually a paper I wrote in high school and didn't do anything with. We had to do a senior capstone.
Typical, right?
Yeah, classic. So I wrote the paper. I talked about the importance of free play for children's development, for their brains. 80% of a child's brain is developed before kindergarten.
Really?
So yeah, 80%. So it's really critical. The early years are so important. So I talked about that in the paper. And Toy Libraries was just a little note at the end, like in my last sentence, because toy libraries as a concept have been around for a little bit, for a while, I should say. There's a U.S. Toy Library Association. So they're often very grassroots, and they're usually independently run. So usually it's freestanding. Someone opens a brick and mortar spot and says, come check out toys. That's all we do.
Yeah.
It's just toys. They're like self-contained.
Right.
I think the way we did it, when I then revisited the idea in college for a class, it was education, poverty, and development, and the professor was amazing. And she said, do a mock proposal. And so I did one, and she came up to me after for the toy libraries and was like, you should submit this to the Social Venture Innovation Challenge.
Yeah.
So initially we didn't pass through our first attempt, and then our second attempt, we did succeed in making it to finals, and we did win a little bit of seed money, and the UNH Alumni Association was great to us. They funded us fully when we applied to them. So the idea morphed once I had someone believing in it.
Right.
And once I had that professor just say, no, like, make this a real thing. And I think what makes it a little different or unique is that we collaborate with existing libraries. We did not create a brick and mortar. We weren't trying to profit off memberships.
Right.
Like, we are very much a 501c3 nonprofit.
Yeah.
And we don't reinvent the wheel. We know libraries are out there doing amazing work. And if we
Right.
can just add to it and provide toys, that's our goal. So college students volunteer. We wanted it to be a service learning opportunity. And we have cohorts each year. The pandemic was a little bit of a struggle.
Sure.
We had just gotten off the ground in 2019, and then the pandemic hit, and I think we've kind of been rebuilding a bit ever since. But I guess that's the long story of where it started as an idea and kind of how we run it and where it is now.
Yeah. Well, that actually makes me wonder. A lot of folks during the pandemic talked about how one of the things that was jarring for them was everything suddenly transitioned to we're interacting virtually, right? And, you know, for professionals and adults, right, that's you know, more screen time, you know, more at home and on their computers and all that. But for kids, that, I imagine that was a big shock too, right? Whether it's you're just talking about remote education, which, you know, was a struggle for a lot of folks, but let alone playtime, right? How much did the pandemic impact all the play and, you know, learning development opportunities like that you're talking about, right? So did any of that dynamic play into how you thought about what the toy library was doing?
Yeah, and I think it did definitely influence some of our offerings. I think that's the biggest way, because we do these quarterly webinars for parents and caretakers as well. And our very first one was at this really scary time for a lot of people. So our first one was with Dr. Nick Meehan at UNH he's a psychologist, on childhood anxiety and like how parents can help their children navigate anxiety. And so it definitely influenced what we were offering, I think, to families. And I'm hopeful that the toys that we had out in the community, because many libraries were open in some capacity,
Right.
I think that the librarians were really on the front lines in a lot of ways that maybe didn't get spoken about. Like, it was obviously the nurses first and foremost and the doctors, but there were real, like, civil servants out there providing really incredible services. And I hope that our toys that were at the libraries did provide some levity for families. And we do have family games that are available for checkout. We have Othello, which I know I grew up playing with my sister, and she beat me every time. Like, I could lose in 2 moves, which is, I don't even know how it's possible. But like, I hope that those were kind of a respite for people in some ways of, this might not be an item that you have at home. It's a bit out of your norm. It's something that can spice it up a little bit in terms of just engagement and play, and not developing that sense of just, I know at least for myself, like, the pandemic was really, really monotonous.
Right.
And so hopefully having toys available that weren't maybe in your normal rotation could have spruced things up a bit.
Yeah.
But it definitely influenced the topics we were covering for sure.
Sure. Well, that's cool that you kind of were already set up to be talking to people virtually about, what you were doing on a regular basis. You look through the website, which is incredible. I've been on it, it's a really nicely designed, the whole thing looks like a toy, right? Like it's visually appealing. Like if I was a kid and I'm an adult, like I'm on there and I'm like, damn, I want to get some of these games. But I notice there isn't like an iPad or something. I don't know what the right terminology is of, like all the toys that I saw in there seem to be like physical things that didn't involve screens or, electronics or something like that. Is that an intentional choice? Like, tell me about that.
Yeah, that's a really good observation. We do try to avoid battery-operated toys and kind of screens ourselves, not because we're like morally opposed or anything.
Sure.
Like technology is so great and definitely provides a lot of learning opportunities. I think it's just we wanted to have the hands-on items out there. I know the American Academy of Pediatrics suggests no toys before 2 years approximately.
Sure.
So I think for us, we just wanted to make those toys available, especially I think wooden toys, these like really nice hands-on items are sometimes less easily obtained for families. So we were trying to level the playing field, and we also try to avoid too many commercial items, so like cartoon characters, things like that.
Yeah.
Just because not every child is going to know who those characters are.
Right.
It's not going to resonate cross-culturally necessarily.
Yeah.
So we do try to avoid certain items, but I wouldn't say it's for any particular stance. It's more
Right.
just kind of the... I'm trying to think of the right word, just the practices we've adopted.
Right.
Yeah. And I would say I will caveat the non-battery operated toys because some of our adapted toys for children with disabilities, those fundamentally have batteries.
Right.
Because if someone has a mobility issue or a physical disability, it can be hard to manipulate small items or
Yeah.
certain objects. And often those toys are 2 to 4 times the cost. Like
Yeah.
you can drop $100+ on a single toy easily.
Really?
If it's adapted. Like even if all the manufacturer did was put a piece of Velcro on it, the price just skyrockets. So having those at libraries for families to check out was really important to us.
Yeah.
Because for families that already might have higher medical expenses and therapy costs, there is no reason that toys should be a barrier for
Right.
for anyone.
Yeah.
So that was really important to us. So some of our toys, I should clarify, do have batteries, but those are mostly the adapted ones.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I should have you talk to my friend Jules, who was on here. You know Jules. Yeah. You met him the other night.
They're amazing.
They are incredible, and they are like the disability wizard.
They are.
To me. But you two could have a great conversation about, just that topic alone, right?
Oh, they're such an expert. I've always been inspired by their work.
Yeah.
It's just incredible who they partner with and the change that they make. So, yeah.
And a fellow alum of the Social Venture Innovation Challenge, right?
Exactly.
Which I have proselytized on this show before, myself being another such alumnus. But this all started because you had, it sounds like, an early interest in early childhood education.
Yeah.
Right? When did that all happen for you? Like, tell me about young Marissa thinking about this stuff.
Yeah, I always provided, so I didn't have like a typical high school job per se, or even middle school. I actually babysat like my entire life. So I provided childcare since I was like 11 in some form or another, whether that was mother's helpering in the early stages or babysitting, or even now I do some, I guess you could call it nannying.
Yeah.
So I think just seeing children grow really inspired it, and wanting to support them, and seeing a lot of inequities even in my own hometown in terms of who had what. I came from a city that was extremely diverse. We had over 52 different languages spoken in the homes.
Wow.
And yeah, it was beautiful. It was an amazing place to grow up.
Yeah.
It was also very economically diverse. And I would say, although it was diverse, you had a lot of people who were on the higher socioeconomic status. You
Yeah.
also, 70% of students were on free or reduced lunch.
Right.
And you could see who had and who didn't have
Yeah.
things, both toys, but also different experiences. My mother helped with the newspaper club at my elementary school.
Oh,
We had a
that's so
little
cute.
newspaper. It was so sweet. And one day she took us to go be food critics. And some of the students had never been to a restaurant before ever.
Wow.
Like they were like, oh, are we going here? And like pointed to like a McDonald's or, those
Yeah.
kinds of things. And for my mom, I think that was really striking. So I think growing up in a really diverse area and seeing equity issues and then also providing childcare made this intersection for me of wanting to ensure that every child has access to high quality educational adapted if necessary toys.
Right.
Because even though children play innately, like children do not need toys to play.
Yeah.
If there are disparities in who does have toys, I think that's just unacceptable. Like
Right.
I don't think we should have those barriers
Yeah.
to play material. So I think that was kind of what inspired it. And then I wrote that paper in high school, and it kind of evolved over time to being what it is now.
Yeah. People talk often now about what is the cost of raising a kid or all the different things that can go into it, right? And recreation might be an overlooked category. This is a stereotype, but I feel like if I asked, one of my grandparents, they'd be like, give them what's the old tour, like the stick in the
Oh,
tire
yeah,
or whatever,
yeah.
right? And like, they'll be fine with that. They don't need a thing. How wrong is that?
I think there are some misconceptions about how much time we allot to play.
Yeah.
I feel like schools get the brunt of this, and I think that the truth is they probably are orienting more and more towards play. I know New Hampshire just a few years back, probably more than a few years ago now, but they got a preschool development grant, huge allotment of money from the government, and one of their drives was to implement more play-based learning in New Hampshire.
I love that.
It's incredible. It's amazing. And the truth is that children, actually humans in general, it takes 400 repetitions to create a new synapse in the brain by rote.
What?
But it only takes 10 to 20 through play.
Wow.
So the difference is dramatic, and you've probably heard me say that in the past, but it's striking, and that statistic has always stuck with me. So I think that we are putting more and more importance and more weight on the value of play, and I think that's a great thing. I think your grandparents and whomever else might not be super far off with the
Right.
rock and a stick.
Sure.
I think open-ended play materials like that are amazing, and children across the world, whether they're in overexploited countries and don't have many resources or not, play is so innate, and to be given very few materials sometimes can enhance creativity. It
Right.
can enhance these different
Yeah.
approaches to play. But I think the issue and the reason that we exist is to address the inequities.
Right.
So it's almost just like if a child sees that their friend has all these toys and they've never gotten to play with them,
Right.
I think that's what we're up against, and we're trying to address that imbalance. So having the items at local libraries where you can check it out for however long the library allows, usually about 3 weeks,
Yeah.
and then give it back when you're done, I think that's what we're really trying to address, because even though children do play innately and a stick might be enough, it's not fair.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, there is something beautiful to that, right? And who can't attest to the infinite creativity of kids, right? And their positivity. And you must remember, I go outside, and before the end of the day, you'd have an entire universe created, whether you're alone or with your friends. I mean, I still remember Soup-de-Doo, my imaginary friend.
Oh, cool.
Every time my family would go hiking, we'd get out of the car, and I would tell them, Soup-de-Doo's already finished. He's already climbed the entire mountain, and he's over there in the parking lot. We can't ever stand up to him. Or Bubba was another one, and I won't share any more about that.
Those are great names, though. That's it. Like, that's so creative, and that was probably reassuring to you. Like, Soup-de-Doo had finished the hike. You know it was surmountable.
Right.
Like, psychologically, someone had already done it.
I didn't even. I've never thought about it like that. But
Okay, maybe I'm overthinking.
No, I think you're probably correct. Like, that's the rational. Like, what about Soup-de-Doo did I need to manifest?
Yeah.
Right. I don't know.
You could do it.
But he was there, like,
Yeah.
all the time, right? So we'd be driving, and he would be flying next to the car, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'd see him next to the car. another great guest, right? Allison, who's a colleague of yours, you know her. New Hampshire Civics, we talked all about kids and they're creative and implicitly understand what's great about. It's a little over-engineered to say the democratic process when you're talking to a 7-year-old, right? But engaging in team-oriented, diverse perspectives, you know, working with other people, right? A lot of that comes naturally to them. And I loved hearing from her what some of her favorite lessons, right, in working with kids and seeing them engage with these concepts were. So I'm going to ask you the same question. What are some things that you've learned about kids, from kids, and just seeing the different ways that they react or experience the cool work that the toy library does?
It's always amazing to see children at the Playdays interacting with their families and with the people who come with them, and just seeing not only the different family dynamics and how diverse those are, but also just their approaches to things. Like there was one child who was we had an experiment station, like, will this sink or float? Like a little tub of water. And she had a penny and she's like, it's going to float. And her caretaker, maybe her grandfather, was like, I think it's going to sink. And so at the end, she puts the penny in and it sinks. And she looks at him and he looks at her and he goes, what happened? And she goes, it went to the bottom. And like, she was just like, you could see like a little like diplomat, like a little like a little lawyer, an attorney, like just like, okay, how do I navigate this communication situation? Like I had an agenda. So you see them kind of communicating in different ways and you kind of wonder who they're going to be and what they're going to become. So I think that's really beautiful. They're also just really funny. Like they're hilarious. Some of the things they say and you're like, how did you know that reference? Like you're so tiny. But they're really funny. It's amazing to watch them interact. I'm trying to think of other examples. We've had a bunch of play days. We've had some sensory ones where we have, you know, shaving cream and like all these different items out, and those tend to draw a younger crowd, and it's just amazing to watch them feel things, because I think as adults that's a sense we can forget about typically if we have all 5 of our senses or however many. Now I'm like 6 senses. No, but like I think we forget about that, and children are in this sensory motor phase when they're that young, and they are feeling and paying attention to things. So I think it slows adults down too, to watch them and to be like, oh yeah, that is a way that I can interface with my environment. So yeah, they're amazing, and I've definitely learned a lot from watching them.
Well, it's like the beauty of seeing anyone experience something for the first time, right? I remember this was an exercise that I've been asked to do, and many people have, right, of trying to appreciate the experience of eating or a meal, right? Like just eat a raisin and just focus on that raisin for like 10 minutes. And it's like kind of gross when you think about it too much. Of like, I don't know, I just want to swallow the raisin now, you know? Like they've done studies on like, if you take a little time before a meal and talk about, hey, this was great, we have gratitude for it, you literally feel more full after eating it. And I feel like kids can show us all kinds of stuff, whether you're touching shaving cream for the first time or...
And it's the way, at least for me, the way I slow down and interact with a child. I'm like, when I interact with a child, I feel like I am, number one, like you're saying, fully present. If you look away for a second, there's going to be a fork in an outlet. Like you can't look away. So you're present the entire time. But I feel like you try to put forth the best version of yourself for this little human. And you just, maybe this is, again, overthinking it, but at least for me, I notice afterwards, I'm like, I spoke as kindly as possible for as long as possible. And that's not how I talk to myself. Like, that's not always, like, we're our own worst critics so much of the time. And at least for me, like, I could go a whole day berating myself for random stuff, but that's not how I talk with, you know, Sarah, who I babysit, or that's a fake name. But, like, it's not, when we take care of someone else, I think we just realize how we need to take care of ourselves too.
And it can bring out the best in us, right? I totally relate. One of my favorite sayings, we are never as hard on other people as we are on ourselves. Right? And like, boy, what does that say? I feel like a common phrase is, you know, be the person that whatever it is your dog, your kid thinks you are. But there's something to that, actually, right? You are curating. I mean, even I just have a little dog. Children of dogs are not analogous, but they are in this way, right? If you are responsible for their whole existence, right?
Yeah.
And you can curate the entire thing. My partner and I joke often that my dog, he'll lean out of the car when we drive and he'll like try and jump out oftentimes because he doesn't. The joke is that nothing bad has ever happened to him.
Right.
So he doesn't understand danger. Like
Yeah.
the fact that he can get hurt is a foreign concept to him because we've pampered him so much.
Yeah.
So maybe we should let him experiment a little bit more and stuff like that. But, you know, there is something very precious and cherished about, wow, this person is new here on planet Earth. They're looking up at me and I want them to have a good time, right?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. You brought up a memory for me. I was sitting in an education course at UNH, and we were talking about, and I think we can be very critical of Western American society for good reason.
Sure.
But with childhood, it was interesting because we were talking about how other cultures do give children so much independence.
Yeah.
And they're treated very much as equals. Like children are not
Like
put on a
little
pedestal.
adults,
Yeah,
right?
they're treated as like you have autonomy. How you want to make this decision is how you want to make it. Like they're treated in that way, and I think that's a beautiful thing. I think the equality is something that we should aspire to with children. I know in Indigenous America, that was a phrase like superiority over children is a colonial concept. Is
Sure.
what they say a lot.
Yeah.
And that I totally resonate with. I think one thing that we do that maybe isn't so bad is this, what we're talking about, this concept of childhood as sacred.
Yeah.
Like this concept of childhood as a special time. I don't think that's necessarily so bad.
Yeah.
I think maybe the inequity or the way we talk down to children, that maybe we could leave that behind. That would be
Right.
great. But in terms of seeing childhood as something special, I don't necessarily agree that that's something we have to get rid of.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Or that there could be a best of both, right? Like
Exactly.
maybe there's a balance. This is like the generational, I don't know if joke is the right way, right? But there's helicopter parents, there's laissez-faire parents, you know, hippie parents, right? And everything in between. And myself as a personal example, I kind of wish I'd had a little bit more of, hey, go outside and, you know, come back when it's dinner time, right? Go explore with your friends, get some cuts and bruises. And I'm probably going to overcorrect, you know, like when I have kids. And, you know, my kids are going to grow up and then they're going to say, man, I wish that I had had a little more structure. My dad was crazy. He let us do whatever we wanted. And then, you know, those kids are like, it's just never ending, right? But I love what you're talking about of we can take what's best about different approaches, different cultures, and orient towards an idolized mean. How do we make sure kids have the best time and then turn into the adults that they want to be? I mean, I heard once that the city of Tokyo in many ways is designed around allowing children to navigate,
It's amazing.
you know, trains or, you know, streets and stuff like that. Because they'll send them to like go run groceries. You know, they'll be like, hey, my 11-year-old kid, go get groceries for me. And
There's the whole Netflix series. I forget what it's called. There is a Netflix like video series of children running errands. I believe it's
That's
Yeah,
incredible.
I'm not sure exactly what
That's
country
what I'm
it's in,
talking
but
about. I wanna
yeah.
watch that.
Yeah, it's really sweet.
yeah, childhood is really special, right? And what's the balance between giving a kid responsibilities that they can find fulfilling and have agency in versus giving them something monotonous and boring that maybe doesn't engender their creativity, right? Like it's all different for everyone. But it's such interesting stuff to think about.
It really is. And I think that's where I'm at too, is thinking about it. Like I've studied it for a really long time. I've worked with children, but I fully acknowledge in running the toy libraries that I myself am not a parent. And
Right.
until you are a parent, it's all hypothetical.
Yeah.
And so we have parents on our board and we integrate parents at every step. And I poll parents. I'm in a
Yeah.
lot of New Hampshire parent Facebook pages to ask them what they want and
Sure.
what's really concretely helpful. So I've gotten ideas that I maybe wouldn't have thought of on my own. Like, for example, navigating family dynamics when you become a parent. If, you know, your child is taken care of by your in-laws and they have different values than you, how do you navigate that?
Yeah.
Or things that parents run up against, or guardians, whoever it may be,
Right.
that until you have children yourself, you might not know about.
Yeah.
So, yeah, because it's fun to talk about and think about, and then when you actually do it yourself, it
Right.
must be so different.
We're armchair
Yeah,
parents. Right?
exactly.
Yeah. Another question I wanted to ask you was like, what's the role of parents in this, right? And you shared a little bit about that, but I would like to hear what kind of feedback do you get from them? Or was it your intention from the beginning to integrate them? Like, tell me about that whole side of it more.
Yeah, it definitely was. We always are accepting feedback, and we always want to grow the program to be like most responsive to parents' interests and needs that we can. We've also seen a lot of variety across the state, I think, in who's interested in what, and even in terms of resources. So our most recent webinar was on finding fun for this summer, like what resources are available in your county. Yeah. And you could definitely see regional differences in who had what activities available to them and at what cost. So we definitely try to engage the parents at every point that we can. I think we need to get better at finding outlets for doing that. And I do also try to reach out to the librarians because they're the ones seeing patrons every day and just ask, is this a good time for a play day? Would parents and families or foster parents, et cetera, want to come to these events, grandparents, whoever it may be that's taking care of the child, would they be interested in this? So I try to ask the librarians as well. And then we also have conversations when we do see the parents. We're not always, the way the model is set up, I'm not always physically there, but when I am, I do like to ask them, you know, is there a toy that you're interested in, or who's using what right now?
Right.
To try to respond to the community's interests. And in terms of feedback that we have gotten, it was really interesting. Very early on, there was a mother at the Dover Public Library who had triplets. I believe she was a single mother, so had 3 children, and she said that it was helpful for her to have the toy library because she could wait to buy a toy until her children had tried it.
Right.
So she didn't waste money on something that they only played with once. And for her, that was a cost savings for her family. And it was also a sustainability thing because she wasn't just getting rid of toys all the time because she knew when she bought it, oh, they've checked this out 4 times. Like, I know they're going to keep playing with this. So we've gotten some of that feedback as well.
The actual how of how it works, right? Tell me about that. It's integrated into kind of like the existing library infrastructure.
Yes.
It sounds like you can check them out like books.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we partner with local libraries, municipal libraries reach out to us, and we send them, we have different subscription levels. We try to keep the cost really low. We'll even help libraries apply to grants.
Oh, awesome.
So we'll help them fund it. We can give presentations, sometimes the Friends of the Library. Which is typically a nonprofit arm of local libraries, they'll sponsor it and they'll say, we want to subscribe to New Hampshire Toy. And we have differing levels as well. So we try to keep all the levels really low each year. But if someone just wants, you know, I'm going to say a librarian is like, I want to do my own toy drive. I'll get my own toys, but can I be part of the network? They can do that and just subscribe for webinars and keep it really minimal. And just be part of the network. So that's kind of the nitty gritty of how it's set up.
Oftentimes when people are running organizations, you know, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, you know, what their goals are and what the scope of it is an interesting question, right? Whether you want to scale and say, hey, we want to get toy library in every library that we possibly can, or whether you're focused, you know, maybe more on the libraries that we're in, we want them to have a fantastic experience, right? And not that those are exclusives to one another. When you think about your impact, hey, we measure in minutes of awesomeness experienced by kids, you know, or you know, memories that they make, and you know, you can't put that on a spreadsheet, kind of by design, and like that's okay. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I would love to, and the state library is doing a lot of this, and we actually owe them a catalog, but they are doing great work in terms of, it's almost like interlibrary loan. So getting things out statewide, because not every library in New Hampshire is in a network. So in Massachusetts, for example, they have the Minuteman Library Network, and the you can go to almost any town library and use your Minuteman card. So you don't have to
cool.
be a resident of that town. The way we operate now, we're in, I'm trying to think, we were in the Dover Library for a long time.
Yeah.
So when we were there, it was mostly Dover residents who could use it. You could pay to get an out-of-town card, I believe.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's fairly localized. And this isn't to say, like, for example, Manchester is part of a small network. So some towns are. But the state is doing a really beautiful job of getting items out kind of on request to any library and having traveling, almost, not exhibits, but traveling catalogs or traveling resources. So I think that would be a vision. And they are doing that work and collaborating with them more closely. I think the problem I run into a little bit in running the toy libraries is more just like bandwidth.
Sure.
We're 100% volunteer run, which, so no paid staff. Every dollar given goes straight to programming or needed supplies for the toy libraries or, office supplies, et cetera. It all goes to the program, which is beautiful in that people know that they are supporting this. But tricky in terms of how much time everyone can allot to it. So I think in terms of impact and like grand 10-year plan, we would love to have even more traveling items and really get to as many places as we can.
Yeah.
We do have about 6 locations. We have 2 in Coos County.
Yeah.
We have in the Seacoast. We have in Manchester. So we are spread out a bit, but to have the impact that we'd like to have and really have it accessible everywhere. That's kind of our long-term vision. And it's funny you ask this, actually, because when we first started, like before we even had a name, people were asking us this because we're the New Hampshire Toy Library Network. So when we were incorporating, they were like, are you sure you want to call it that? And I'm like, yep, I'm positive. Like, this is New Hampshire. So, yeah.
Interesting, because people might have the impression that it was a publicly funded or program.
Or even they were asking us too about scaling. They're like, are you sure you want to keep it New Hampshire? Like, why don't you just call it Toy Library Network? And then you can expand to other states. And I'm like, at the time I was like, no, like I'm very committed. This is going to be a New Hampshire entity. And we are always, if people reach out to us, like, and we have the bandwidth to help, like in terms of other states starting their own, or we're always happy to do that if and when we can. But in terms of our actual mission, like we knew from the beginning, this is a Granite State. This is a New Hampshire entity. So.
This is perfect for this podcast. I'm hearing you talk a lot about how the goal is sounding like it's about being broader, right? Not necessarily bigger, but broader, and leaning into what existing infrastructure is there. How cool would it be to, say, hey, we've a dozen nodes, right, for the network in New Hampshire, but you don't have to be a resident of any particular town, or removing any of those barriers so that in theory or on paper, anyone can show up and get a toy for their kid, right? And it sounds like you're doing it. You're making the strides and identifying the roadblocks, and like that's the guiding star.
Yeah, and the state is doing amazing work too. Like I definitely want to emphasize that. Like the state library and the state librarian are incredible, and they just do the most innovative stuff. So it's really exciting to see and be kind of a tangential, like on the side, aspiring collaborator too. So yeah, no, New Hampshire's a really amazing place in that sense.
And like the role of the modern library too, right? I mean, you must run into this. People talk about the erosion of community centers, right, in a lot of America. And libraries are kind of one of those few remaining places for people, right? What an innovative, good thing that it feels like, wow, why weren't we doing this already? This makes so much sense. What a good thing for libraries to lean into and help make possible.
Agreed completely. No, the libraries are amazing third spaces, and they do so much more than just check in and check out books. Like they are epicenters for so many communities, and we've definitely seen that ourselves, like in ways we didn't expect necessarily the toy libraries to be helpful. For example, we've had one library where they say they have a lot of supervised visits between social workers and their foster care caseloads and different children who are in the foster care system. They'll supervise visits between them and a parent or whomever else. And the toys, I guess, have been really good icebreakers for those visits.
Yeah.
To have something to manipulate with your hands and just really talk things out is really helpful for people of any age, but especially children, to have a game to play while they're in these potentially really emotional situations. So the toy libraries and libraries as a whole, I think it's been a really amazing collaboration, because the libraries themselves are spaces where these are taking place. And a lot of libraries now have Narcan or other items that we need for different like health crises and different like a whole variety of issues. Like you can get tax forms at the library. Like even from the mundane to the higher level, libraries, I think, are just such incredible community resources, and they go so far beyond, I think, what people picture the stereotypical library to be.
Right. Anything, particularly things that are publicly funded, the question is always asked, what's the return on this, right? What are we getting for the money we spend? Programs like yours, you know, with like the shoestring budget, you do incredible stuff. And I am always like astonished at organizations and programs out there, right, that really for not very much money, they're able to do incredible stuff. You know, the Master Gardener program run through UNH Extension, they run like a 3 seed program every single year. And gardening is kind of, I mean, it's not so different from play, right? It's like the ultimate metaphor for you, quote unquote, invest a little bit up front for lifelong yields, you know, and maybe it's hard to quantify on the face of it in money, but who's doing the longitudinal study on the health of an economy over the course of 50 years with the difference of, all right, this entire generation of kids all had like really awesome, intellectually stimulating creative play experiences, and then this generation of kids didn't. And this is the difference over time for the society that creates, the impact that those people have in the world, right? Like, it's a beautiful thing that you're doing because it's small scale, but I think I'm getting, you're humble, but like, you're quite serious too about like play is a very important thing to teach kids and to think about in the world. So tell me about that.
Yeah, happy to. And I think you hit on a really important point. That one, the Master Gardeners are amazing.
Yeah.
I used to work at UNH Extension
gosh.
for my day job, and they are incredible.
Yeah.
And so I think gardening and a lot of those activities, running, it's actually one of the key tenets of play. So Stuart Brown, who is like a forefather of the play field, as in terms of, you know, an academic study, he notes that the difference between work and play is actually not so big as people think if you go into it with a certain mentality. So for some people, running is a chore, and it is something they do because they tell themselves they need to exercise, and they force themselves to do it, and they hate every second of it.
Yeah.
And then for some people, it's euphoria. And they're like, I am in the zone, which is a key facet of play, and I am not self-conscious, and I am not aware of time. And that's what you need for something to be play. It has to meet criteria like that of you are fully immersed in it, and you are not self-conscious. So that makes something play. It doesn't have to be, I clocked in at work and I left work and now I'm going to go play.
Yeah.
It can, if what you do is joyful for you, there are times where you're in the zone. And I think people do experience that. They're like, I don't know where those 3 hours went. Like I was locked in.
Yeah.
And by some definitions, that is almost a form of play.
Yeah.
So I think that again comes down to like, we differentiate a lot in our day-to-day, and like we have these set silos, but play is actually a mind state.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was an interesting point you made about gardening.
Well, that we could all probably use a little more of, right? And it's probably one of those things that it comes, like kids aren't taught. Maybe I feel like they don't come into the world with an intuitive sense of, you know, that distinction of work and play. It's probably just all play to them, right?
Yeah, and you see children get really immersed in when they're given a responsibility. And like, I think the Montessori method really enhances this, or like not enhances, what's the word, like really leverages this.
Yeah.
Like this sense of like they want real things to do and they get immersed in it, and for them that's a fine line, like you're saying, between play and quote unquote work.
Plato, I think, said that you could learn more about a person in 5 minutes of play than an hour of conversation. I don't know if he was talking about wrestling or whatnot, but but there is something true to that. When people are kind of released from some of the psychological barriers of, oh, I got a thing to do, and people are looking at me, right? Like I think you're right in that it can prevent us from being our truest selves. Mm-hmm. And kids don't know how not to be themselves until we teach them not to, right? You've thought a lot about play in a very intentional way. And it's a little funny because, how do you study something like play, right? The thing that's it's supposed to be the opposite of that. But you are someone who, you've read about it, like you've written papers about, the value of it psychologically and all that. I don't know. I feel like this is a huge lesson that a lot of adults would be interested in.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think of how because I definitely do. It definitely does impact my day to day. And I think one of the ways it does is, it's funny because I would say I'm not much of a hobbyist. Like when people ask me personally, like, oh, what do you like to do? I'm like,
yeah.
I don't really know, but I think it's,
here,
I just kind of float around. And I think I try, or I would like to try to really embrace that mentality of like immersing myself in whatever it is I'm doing,
right,
and trying to enjoy all those moments and kind of embedding play into just my mentality and like the way I go about even my day-to-day things.
Yeah.
Like I really honestly don't mind doing the dishes, like things like that is like, it's soapy. Like there's something that in and of itself is a sensory experience.
It's soapy. It smells good.
Exactly.
It's
satisfying.
meditative. Yeah.
Yeah. When you're done, you have this tangible thing you've completed. It feels good. So I think for me, maybe it's blurring the lines. Maybe that's what I'm trying to do, is just play in my day,
right,
without having to set aside a specific time,
right,
for play, which is also great if people enjoy certain activities. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's just like, how do I immerse it in or embed it into what I'm already kind of doing?
Yeah. Well, there's an instinct, right, as adults and seemingly self-aware rationalists to be like, okay, let's design the perfect play experience. It will begin at 9:05 a.m. and we will play for 17 minutes outside, and it's just like, kids don't understand any of that. They're just like, hey, there's a rock, there's a stick, let's go create a universe. Like they're so ready to go. And I love that. I love everything you're saying. If like there's a little bit of that in every day. What are some of your favorite games or, playful activities even?
Yeah.
Or even some of your favorites as a kid? I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, I think for me, I was always word oriented and like very verbal.
Scrabble.
So, yes, Scrabble is a really fun one. My family's we all joke, you're either a Scrabble family or you're not. Like there's no in between.
Yeah.
So my family definitely likes Scrabble. I almost leaned more Boggle, if you've ever played that, because it's like a quick speed version of it. And it was
Boggle's nuts.
Yeah, it was good for my attention span. Like I was like, Scrabble's like a commitment, but Boggle, like couple minutes, you have a game played.
Yeah.
So I definitely leaned that route in terms of games. I also liked, kind of wordy or verbal, even like party games like Taboo, like those kinds of things where it's like just like for fun. And
right,
I think for me, the hardest ones, and this is the really amazing thing about play, is you can lean on your strengths or you can work on things you need to work on.
Yeah.
And for me, those were the more visual games like Blockus, or the more strategy-oriented ones like Catan.
Yeah.
And it's funny, for someone who runs a toy library, I think Catan and some of those kinds of games actually get at like some of my like childhood anxieties, even of just like, the fear school sometimes instills in you of like being inadequate or not being good at enough
Right.
at things. And so I have to like remind myself when I play those games that it's a game and it's okay to lose, and like you're playing with friends who are not going to care.
Right.
So even as an adult, even though we think we're beyond maybe social emotional learning, like even
Yeah.
though we think we're past that, like there are definitely times where play can bring out, okay, no, this is something I still can work on and get
Yeah.
better at. So
I want to win Settlers of Catan, though.
yeah, I know.
I don't want to lose.
I know.
It's painful to lose. Yeah. No, I totally agree with everything you said, and I love it. I'm the kind of person, like I find it difficult to separate these things. Like, but everyone will beat me in Catan because I just want to create like the non-zero sum economy of abundance, right? But like you can't really do that in Settlers of Catan. Like someone has to win. But I like the trading. I always like to make deals with people, and then they take advantage of my trust and they demolish me. And that's why I have a podcast about optimism, I guess. But
And that's why Plato said his thing.
that's why Plato
Maybe.
said his thing, right?
Although I like to think maybe Catan doesn't bring out everyone's best.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's all different, Like
Yeah.
that's the beauty of it is there's different games to get different parts of people out, and like it's all so fun. So Marissa, if people want to get involved or learn more about the toy library, how can they do that?
Yeah, we're always grateful for any community support. We have a website, nhtoy.org. We're on Facebook and Instagram if people want to connect there. We're also looking for new board members. If anyone wants to join the board and is interested in this kind of work, happy to connect and see if it's a fit for everybody. And in general, volunteering, donations, if people have gently used toys that they are looking to rehome or want to contribute financially, we always are grateful for any kind of support and connections.
Excellent. Well, I've had you on here for over an hour now, and I promised it wouldn't be much more than that, but I would like to know, what makes you optimistic about the future of your work? The toy library, like you are an optimist, I can tell. You're here, you're doing the work, you're creating good things in the world. What's going on in there?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is librarians. Like,
Yeah.
they make me so optimistic for this work. I have loved 99.999% of every librarian I've ever met. And the librarians in the state here in New Hampshire are just incredible. And they do so many amazing things with the resources they have, which can vary dramatically in place to place, and they make magic happen no matter what. So they are definitely a huge inspiration for me and my optimism.
Well, I hope that this felt like play.
100%. It was such
you.
a joy.
And thank you very much for coming on. I'd love to have you on again someday. Keep it up. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Hey there. Thanks for spending some time with us, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. You can learn more about today's guest and how to get involved with or support their work in the show notes. If you'd like to suggest a guest for the show or have any story tips for our Good News in New Hampshire newsletter, shoot me a message at hello@granitegoodness.com. Music for this episode was provided by the band Sneaky Miles, who hail from Newmarket, New Hampshire. Recording space was provided by Treeline Outfitters in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Until next time, I'm the creator of Granite Goodness and the host of the Granite Goodness podcast, Andy DeMeo. Thanks for listening.